Have you ever wanted to see a bully boss get what's coming to them? Well, let me tell you about the day my boss called me incompetent and fired me, while having absolutely no idea that I owned 90% of his company. The look on Richard's face when he found out? Priceless. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story is about patience, justice, and the sweetest revenge you've ever heard. My name is Gary Thompson, and for 15 years, I've been living the most elaborate undercover operation in corporate America. Every morning at 7:30 a.m., I catch the same city bus to downtown Chicago, carrying my worn leather briefcase and a homemade turkey sandwich. I sit in cubicle 47B, troubleshoot IT problems, and blend into the background like I'm just another middle-aged guy counting down to retirement. Nobody suspects that the quiet man in the faded polo shirt owns Thompson Industries, a company worth $200 million. You see, when my father passed away 3 years ago, he left me something unexpected. Not just money or property, but an entire manufacturing empire he'd built from scratch. The lawyers wanted me to step in immediately as CEO, but I had a different plan. I want to understand this business from the ground up, I told them. Register me as an employee under my middle name, Gary Stevens. Let me learn what it's really like to work here. My wife Mary thought I'd lost my mind. Honey, you inherited a fortune, and you want to keep riding the bus to work? But she understood when I explained my reasoning. How can you truly lead people if you've never walked in their shoes? How can you make decisions about their lives if you've never lived their reality? So, I became Gary Stevens, IT support specialist, while my father's hand-picked CEO, Richard Williams, ran the day-to-day operations. The irony wasn't lost on me that Richard had no idea he was bossing around his actual employer, but that arrangement worked perfectly fine until I started noticing things that made my blood boil. Richard was everything wrong with corporate leadership rolled into one person. He'd strut through the office in his $1,000 suits, treating employees like they were disposable. I watched him humiliate Sarah from accounting for asking about her promised raise. I saw him take credit for innovations that came from our engineering team. And worst of all, I discovered he was using company funds for his personal expenses, golf trips, expensive dinners, even payments to his ex-wife that should have come from his own pocket. The hardest part was staying silent. Every instinct screamed at me to intervene when I saw good people suffering. Like when Richard made Jessica from marketing work unpaid overtime for weeks, then criticized her lack of dedication in front of the entire team. Or when he fired Tom from shipping just 2 months before his retirement, claiming restructuring needs. These weren't just bad management decisions. They were deliberate cruelty. But I had a larger plan forming. If I revealed myself too early, Richard would simply clean up his act temporarily. I needed to document everything, build an ironclad case, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. So I smiled politely when he dismissed my suggestions, nodded respectfully when he questioned my competence, and carefully recorded every instance of his misconduct. The breaking point came last Tuesday morning. I'd discovered that Richard was secretly negotiating to sell Thompson Industries to our biggest competitor for significantly less than market value. The deal would have resulted in massive layoffs and the destruction of everything my father built. When I tried to subtly suggest that such a decision might require board approval, Richard exploded. "Stevens, you're just an IT guy," he sneered in front of the entire morning meeting. "Stick to fixing computers and leave business decisions to people who actually matter. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes watched me absorb that humiliation, waiting to see if I'd fight back or crumble like so many others before me. I did neither. I simply smiled and said, "You're absolutely right, sir. I apologize for overstepping." But inside, I was already planning Richard's professional funeral. That evening, I sat in my modest apartment, the one I maintained to preserve my cover, and made a series of phone calls to the company's legal team, to our accounting firm, and to the private investigator I'd hired months earlier. "It's time," I told each of them. "Prepare for the shareholder meeting." Mary found me staring out the window at midnight, still processing the decision I'd made. "The hardest part about having power," I told her, "is knowing when to use it. Tomorrow, Richard's going to learn that actions have consequences." She squeezed my hand. "Your father would be proud. He always said the best leaders are forged in the trenches, not the boardroom." The next morning felt different. Richard strutted into the office with unusual swagger, probably because his deal with our competitor was moving forward. He'd been more aggressive lately, more careless with his cruelty, as if he sensed his time was running short and wanted to inflict maximum damage while he still could. During our weekly staff meeting, Richard laid out his vision for the company's future, code words for the sellout he'd negotiated. When Jennifer from Human Resources asked about job security, he laughed dismissively. "Jennifer, if you were more focused on performance instead of security, maybe you'd understand that change is inevitable. Some people adapt, others get left behind." I watched 20 good people absorb that threat, their faces showing the fear and uncertainty that Richard seemed to feed on. These weren't just employees to me. They were people whose livelihoods depended on decisions made in boardrooms they'd never see. Sarah was supporting her elderly mother. Tom's son was starting college in the fall. Jennifer's husband had been laid off 6 months ago, making her the family's only income source. But Richard saw them as numbers on a spreadsheet, obstacles to his grand plan, expendable resources in his quest for a bigger bonus. The casual cruelty in his voice when he dismissed their concerns confirmed everything I'd suspected about his character. After the meeting, I returned to my cubicle and opened my computer. Hidden in encrypted files were months of documentation, financial records showing misappropriated funds, recorded conversations revealing his illegal sale negotiations, testimony from employees about harassment and discrimination. Every piece of evidence I'd need to destroy him professionally and legally. My phone buzzed with a text from our head of legal. "Documents prepared. Are you ready to proceed?" I typed back a single word. "Tomorrow." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Richard thought he was playing chess, moving pieces around the board to achieve his perfect endgame. He had no idea that he wasn't even a player. He was just another piece, and I'd been planning his checkmate for months. As I packed up my worn briefcase that evening, I caught Richard watching me from his glass office. There was something predatory in his expression, like a shark circling wounded prey. He'd been building toward something all week, some grand gesture of dominance that would cement his authority and crush any remaining morale among the staff. I had a feeling tomorrow would be the day he finally showed his true colors completely. And when he did, I'd be ready with a revelation that would change everything. The stage was set. Richard had no idea that his greatest humiliation was less than 24 hours away, or that the quiet man in cubicle 47B was about to become his worst nightmare. Tomorrow's confrontation would be the kind of moment that people talk about for years. The day a bully finally met his match and discovered that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one with the power to destroy you. I went home that night and told Mary, "Honey, remember that shareholder meeting I mentioned? Tomorrow's going to be very interesting." The next morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I caught my usual bus, carried my usual briefcase, and sat in my usual cubicle. But everything felt different. Today was the day Richard Williams would learn that actions have consequences, that cruelty always comes with a price, and that sometimes the person you've been stepping on has the power to knock you off your pedestal. Richard walked into the office like a man who owned the world. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his confidence radiating from every step, and his smile carried the satisfaction of someone about to deliver a killing blow. He'd been planning something big. I could see it in the way he interacted with his inner circle, the hushed conversations, the meaningful glances toward my cubicle. The morning dragged on with unusual tension. Richard held several closed-door meetings, and I noticed security personnel making rounds through the building. Whatever he was planning, it was elaborate and designed for maximum humiliation. Part of me almost admired the theatrical nature of it all. Richard might be a terrible human being, but he certainly had a flair for dramatic timing. Around 11 o'clock, the announcement came over the intercom. All staff to conference room A immediately. Mandatory meeting regarding company restructuring. The tone was ominous, official, and designed to strike fear into every employee's heart. People filed out of their cubicles with the nervous energy of workers who sensed their jobs might be in jeopardy. I took my time gathering my things, letting the crowd thin out before making my way to the conference room. As I walked down the hallway, I passed Richard's office and saw him on the phone, gesturing animatedly. Through the glass, I caught fragments of his conversation. Example of what happens. Dead weight. Message to the others. The conference room buzzed with nervous whispers when I arrived. Employees clustered in small groups, speculating about layoffs, reorganizations, or worse. Richard stood at the front of the room with 2 security guards flanking him, an intimidation tactic designed to make whatever came next feel official and irreversible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who believed himself untouchable. "Today, we're going to address a problem that's been plaguing this company for too long. We have individuals in this organization who think they can coast by, contribute nothing meaningful, and still collect a paycheck." My heart rate didn't increase. My palms didn't sweat. After months of preparation, I felt nothing but calm anticipation. Richard was about to give me the perfect opening for everything I'd planned. "Some people seem to think they can question business decisions made by their superiors," he continued, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. "They think they can insert themselves into conversations where they don't belong, offer opinions nobody asked for, and generally disrupt the smooth operation of this company." The room was dead silent now. Everyone understood that someone was about to be made an example of, and the smart play was to keep your head down and avoid eye contact with management. "Gary Stevens," Richard called out, his voice sharp with authority. "Stand up." I rose slowly from my chair, maintaining eye contact with him as murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was it, the moment Richard had been building toward all week. His opportunity to demonstrate absolute power and terrorize his workforce into submission. For the past several months, Mr. Stevens here has demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of his role in this organization, Richard announced, practically savoring each word. He thinks he knows better than management. He thinks he can question decisions made by people far more qualified than he'll ever be. The speech felt rehearsed, like Richard had practiced it in the mirror to maximize its devastating impact. He was enjoying this. The power, the fear in people's faces, the knowledge that he could destroy someone's livelihood and everyone else would be too terrified to object. This kind of insubordination cannot be tolerated, he continued, his voice rising with righteous indignation. We don't need incompetent people like you. Leave! The words echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. 27 employees stared at the floor, terrified that making eye contact might make them Richard's next target. The security guard stepped forward slightly, ready to escort me out if I caused any trouble. But instead of the humiliation and defeat Richard expected, I smiled. Not a forced smile or a nervous grin. A genuine, peaceful smile of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen next. Fine, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Fire me. Richard blinked, clearly thrown off by my calm response. He'd expected begging, anger, or at least some sign that his psychological warfare had worked. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my phone. That's an interesting decision, Richard, I continued, still smiling as I typed a quick message. I think the shareholders will find it very educational. What are you talking about? Richard snapped. But I could hear the first note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. This wasn't going according to his script. I finished typing and looked up at him with the same patient expression I'd worn for the past 15 months. I'm talking about the emergency shareholder meeting that's been called for this afternoon. You know, the one where we'll be discussing your unauthorized salary increases, your misappropriation of company funds, and your secret negotiations to sell Thompson Industries without board approval. The color drained from Richard's face. Around the room, employees began lifting their heads, sensing that something unexpected was happening. The power dynamic that had seemed so clear moments ago was shifting in ways nobody could understand. You don't know what you're talking about, Richard said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Security, escort this man out immediately. Actually, I said, holding up one hand as the guards approached, I think we should wait for my lawyers to arrive. They'll be here in about 15 minutes with some very interesting documents. That's when Richard realized he might have made a terrible mistake. The 15 minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Richard paced behind the conference table, his earlier confidence evaporating with each passing moment. The security guards looked confused, unsure whether to proceed with escorting me out or wait for clarification. 27 employees sat in stunned silence, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented but unable to comprehend exactly what was unfolding. I remained standing calmly beside my chair, occasionally checking my phone for updates from my legal team. The briefcase at my feet contained documents that would reshape everything these people thought they knew about Thompson Industries. But I wasn't ready to reveal those cards yet. Timing, as my father always said, was everything in business. Richard's phone rang, breaking the tense silence. He answered with visible irritation. What? No, I'm in the middle of... What do you mean the board called an emergency meeting? I didn't authorize... His face went pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Today. This afternoon. That's impossible. We need at least... He hung up and stared at me with dawning horror. The pieces were finally starting to fall into place in his mind, but he couldn't quite believe what they were telling him. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the room, "I think we should take a brief recess. In about 10 minutes, some very important people are going to arrive, and they're going to want to speak with all of you about your experiences working here under Mr. Williams's leadership." "You can't just..." Richard started, but his voice trailed off as the conference room doors opened. 3 people entered with the kind of purposeful stride that immediately commanded attention. Margaret Chen, the company's head of legal affairs, looked impeccable in her navy suit and carried a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Behind her walked James Morrison, our chief financial officer, and Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who chaired our board of directors. But what made Richard's face go completely white wasn't their arrival. It was the fact that all 3 of them walked directly to me and shook my hand with the respectful deference reserved for someone very important. "Mr. Thompson," Margaret said formally, "we have all the documentation you requested. Are you ready to proceed?" The conference room erupted in confused whispers. "Thompson," but my nameplate clearly said Stevens. Several employees looked back and forth between me and the legal team, trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. Richard found his voice first. "What the hell is going on here? Who are you people? And why are you calling Stevens by a different name?" Dr. Hartwell stepped forward with the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "Mr. Williams, I think it's time you learned something very important about the man you just fired. Gary Thompson is the majority shareholder of Thompson Industries. He owns 90% of this company." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around the room, employees stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to dawning understanding. "That's impossible," Richard whispered. "Thompson Industries was founded by Thomas Thompson, and he died 3 years ago. His son inherited everything, but no one knows who he is or where." "I'm standing right here," I said quietly. "And for the past 15 months, I've been watching you run my father's company into the ground while treating his employees like garbage." The transformation in Richard's demeanor was instantaneous and complete. The confident bully who had humiliated me moments earlier vanished, replaced by a desperate man who suddenly understood the magnitude of his situation. "Mr. Thompson, sir, I had no idea," he stammered. "If I had known who you were, I never would have... This is all just a misunderstanding. I was simply trying to maintain discipline and..." "And embezzling company funds?" I interrupted. "And negotiating to sell my company without authorization? And creating a hostile work environment that's driven away some of our best talent?" Margaret Chen opened her briefcase and began laying documents on the conference table. "We have comprehensive evidence of financial misconduct spanning the past 18 months, she announced. "Unauthorized personal expenses charged to company accounts, manipulation of quarterly reports, and attempted fraud in the negotiations with Meridian Industries." James Morrison stepped forward with his own set of papers. "The financial irregularities total approximately $340,000. Additionally, Mr. Williams has been in secret negotiations to sell Thompson Industries for 60% of its actual market value, a deal that would have netted him a substantial personal commission while devastating the company's workforce." The employees in the room were slowly beginning to grasp the scope of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a fired worker getting revenge. This was the actual owner of the company revealing that their CEO had been systematically defrauding the business and planning to destroy their livelihoods for personal gain. Richard's face had gone from pale to gray. "Sir, please, let me explain. The sale to Meridian was going to position us for tremendous growth opportunities, and the expenses were necessary for client entertainment and business development. Everything I did was in the company's best interests." "Really?" I asked, pulling out my own set of documents. "Like using company credit cards for your divorce attorney fees? Or taking your mistress to Hawaii on what you claimed was a sales conference? Or promising Meridian's CEO that you could deliver the sale regardless of board approval because, and I quote, the real owner is some absent trust fund baby who doesn't know anything about business?" The recording device Margaret activated filled the room with Richard's own voice from a conversation he'd had just 2 weeks earlier. His words about me, about the employees, and about his plans for the company painted a picture of breathtaking arrogance and contempt. "You've been recording me?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "I've been protecting my investment," I corrected, "and more importantly, protecting the people who actually make this company successful, the employees you've been terrorizing for months." Dr. Hartwell addressed the room. "We want everyone to know that effective immediately, Richard Williams is terminated from all positions within Thompson Industries. His employment contract is void due to breach of fiduciary duty, and he will be subject to both civil and criminal prosecution for his fraudulent activities." The security guards, who had been hired by Richard to intimidate me, now looked to Dr. Hartwell for direction. She nodded toward their former boss. "Mr. Williams, you have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your office. These gentlemen will escort you from the premises." But Richard wasn't finished fighting. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, his composure completely shattered. "I've given everything to this company. I've worked 60-hour weeks. I've increased profits. I've streamlined operations. This is how you repay loyalty?" "Loyalty?" I stepped closer to him, my voice remaining calm despite the anger I felt. "Is that what you call stealing from the company? Is that loyalty when you humiliate employees in front of their colleagues? When you fire good people just to demonstrate your power? When you sell out everyone's job security for your own financial gain?" The room watched in fascination as the power dynamic completely reversed. The man who had terrorized them for months was now reduced to desperate pleading, while the quiet IT worker they'd barely noticed revealed himself as their ultimate protector. "I want to address everyone who works here," I said, turning away from Richard to face the employees. "For the past 15 months, I've been working alongside you, watching how this company really operates from your perspective. I've seen your dedication, your creativity, and your commitment to excellence despite the obstacles you've faced." Sarah from accounting raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Thompson, sir, we had no idea you were... you always seem so... normal?" I smiled. "That was intentional. My father built this company from nothing, but he always said that the best leaders understand their business from the ground up. I needed to see what it was really like to work here before I could effectively lead." Jennifer from Human Resources spoke up. "Does this mean our jobs are safe? Richard told us that layoffs were inevitable because of market conditions." "Market conditions were never the problem," James Morrison interjected. Mr. Williams's mismanagement was the problem. Under proper leadership, Thompson Industries is actually positioned for significant growth. Richard made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. The Meridian deal would have made everyone rich. You're all going to regret this when the company struggles without that partnership. Actually, I said, I've already spoken with 3 other companies that are interested in partnership deals. Companies that want to work with us, not absorb us. Companies that value our workforce instead of viewing them as expendable. Margaret Chen handed me a legal document. Mr. Thompson, this officially confirms your assumption of the Chief Executive Officer position, effective immediately. The board has unanimously approved your appointment. The transformation in the room's atmosphere was palpable. Employees who had entered the meeting in fear of losing their jobs now realized they were witnessing the beginning of a new era. The oppressive tension that had characterized the workplace under Richard's leadership was already starting to dissipate. I want everyone to know, I announced, that my first priority is creating a workplace where good people can do their best work without fear of retaliation or arbitrary punishment. We're going to review every policy, every procedure, and every decision made over the past 18 months to ensure fairness and transparency. Tom from shipping, who had been fired 2 months before his retirement, stood up. Mr. Thompson, sir, does this mean there might be opportunities for people who were wrongfully terminated? Tom, your termination was effective immediately upon my assumption of leadership duties. You'll receive full back pay, restored benefits, and a formal apology for the injustice you suffered. We'll also be reviewing every other termination that occurred under questionable circumstances. The security guards had finished clearing out Richard's office and were now flanking him at the door. His expensive suit looked wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and his face showed the hollow expression of a man whose entire world had collapsed in the span of 30 minutes. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'll fight this in court. I'll expose every detail of what happened here today." "Please do," I replied calmly. "I'm sure the press will be very interested in how a CEO systematically defrauded his company while planning to sell it to competitors. It should make for excellent headlines." As the doors closed behind Richard, the conference room felt like it was breathing again. 27 employees looked at me with a mixture of awe, relief, and curiosity about what would happen next. "I know this has been overwhelming," I said, "so let me make a few things clear immediately. First, your jobs are not only secure, they're about to get significantly better. Second, we're going to implement profit-sharing programs, improved benefits, and genuine opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than favoritism." Dr. Hartwell stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson has also authorized a comprehensive review of all salaries to ensure competitive compensation across every department. Additionally, the company will be implementing employee ownership programs to give everyone a stake in our collective success." The questions came rapidly after that. How long had I been planning this? What were my goals for the company? Would there be opportunities for advancement? How could they be sure this wasn't just another corporate restructuring that would ultimately result in layoffs? I answered each question honestly, explaining my philosophy of leadership through understanding, my commitment to sustainable growth rather than quick profits, and my belief that a company's greatest asset is always its people. These weren't empty corporate buzzwords. They were principles I'd learned by working alongside them, seeing firsthand how poor leadership destroys morale and productivity. As the formal meeting concluded and people began filing out, several employees approached me individually. Some wanted to share stories about their experiences under Richard's leadership. Others had suggestions for improvements, and a few simply wanted to express their disbelief at the morning's revelations. Jessica from marketing was among the last to leave. "Mr. Thompson, I just want you to know that this morning I was updating my resume because I couldn't take another day of Richard's harassment. Now, I'm excited to come to work again." "That's exactly the kind of transformation I was hoping for," I told her. "And I want you to know that your ideas for the Johnson campaign, the ones Richard dismissed without consideration, are exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to pursue." As the conference room finally emptied, I sat down in the chair that had been Richard's just hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that this morning I'd been the quiet man in cubicle 47B, and now I was sitting at the head of the table where all the major decisions were made. Margaret Chen gathered her documents. "The legal proceedings against Mr. Williams will likely take several months, but the evidence is overwhelming. We anticipate full restitution plus damages. Make sure any recovered funds go directly into employee compensation and company improvements," I instructed. "I don't want to profit from his misconduct. I want to use it to repair the damage he caused." Dr. Hartwell shook my hand. "Your father would be proud of how you've handled this situation. The patience and strategic thinking you've demonstrated are exactly the qualities Thompson Industries needs in its leadership." As the legal team departed, I pulled out my phone and called Mary. "Honey, remember how you said I was crazy for wanting to work in cubicle 47B for 15 months? Well, today proved it was worth every minute." "I saw the news alerts," she said, laughing. "CEO fires boss. Reveals secret identity. Saves company. You're going to be all over social media by tonight." "The press can say whatever they want," I replied. "What matters is that good people can come to work tomorrow without fear, and bad leaders can't hide behind corporate hierarchies when they abuse their power." I spent the rest of the afternoon in individual meetings with department heads, listening to their perspectives on the company's operations and their ideas for improvement. Every conversation reinforced my belief that the best insights come from people who actually do the work, not from executives isolated in corner offices. The transformation was already beginning. You could see it in people's posture, hear it in their voices, feel it in the energy that was returning to the workplace. The oppressive atmosphere that had characterized Thompson Industries under Richard's leadership was being replaced by something I hadn't felt in months: hope. As evening approached, I found myself back in cubicle 47B, packing up the few personal items I'd kept there during my undercover months. The worn photo of Mary and our daughter Emma, the coffee mug with the faded company logo, the desk lamp that barely worked. Simple things that had been my anchor to normalcy during a very abnormal situation. Tom from shipping appeared at my cubicle. "Mr. Thompson, sir, I just wanted to thank you personally. When Richard fired me, I thought my career was over. My wife and I were terrified about how we'd make it to my real retirement date. Tom, you've given this company 32 years of dedicated service. Richard's decision to terminate you was both cruel and stupid. We need your experience and institutional knowledge." "Will you really be different?" he asked quietly. "I've seen a lot of management changes over the years, and they always promise things will improve. But, Tom, I've spent 15 months watching how this company really works. I've seen what happens when employees are treated as expendable resources instead of valuable team members. The changes I'm promising aren't based on management theory. They're based on first-hand experience of what needs to be fixed. As I carried my box of belongings toward the elevator, I passed the empty office that had been Richard's domain. The expensive desk was cleared. The motivational posters about leadership excellence had been removed, and the awards for outstanding performance were boxed up with the rest of his belongings. In 12 hours, that office would be converted into a collaborative workspace where employees could hold brainstorming sessions, informal meetings, and cross-departmental projects. The executive dining room would become an employee break area with comfortable seating and better coffee. The reserved parking spaces would be eliminated in favor of first-come, first-served arrangements. These weren't dramatic gestures. They were practical changes designed to eliminate the artificial barriers between management and employees that Richard had used to maintain his authority through intimidation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. I'll destroy you in court and expose what really happened here." Richard was apparently not adjusting well to his new circumstances. I deleted the message without responding. Men like Richard never truly understand their own downfall because they're incapable of recognizing their own character flaws. He would probably spend years convincing himself that he was the victim of some elaborate conspiracy rather than acknowledging that his own actions had consequences. The elevator doors opened on the parking garage where my 15-year-old Honda Civic waited in the same spot I'd parked it every day for the past 15 months. Tomorrow, I could park in the executive space that came with my new position, but I thought I'd stick with my current spot for a while longer. Some changes were important. Others were just symbolic. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Chicago, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 15 months ago, I'd been a grieving son, trying to honor his father's memory by understanding the business he'd built. Today, I was the CEO of a company that was finally ready to live up to its potential. The radio was playing news updates about the shocking corporate drama that unfolded at Thompson Industries today. But I turned it off. The real story wasn't about corporate intrigue or dramatic revelations. It was about 27 good people who could go to work tomorrow, knowing their contributions mattered and their voices would be heard. When I pulled into the driveway of our modest suburban home, Mary was waiting on the front porch with Emma. My 8-year-old daughter ran to the car with the kind of excitement that only children can muster for something they don't fully understand but know is important. "Daddy, Mommy says you're like a superhero who was pretending to be a regular person," Emma announced as I picked her up. "Something like that, sweetheart. But the real superheroes are the people who do good work even when no one important is watching. I just had to remind everyone that someone important was always watching." Mary hugged both of us. "So what happens now? Do we move to a mansion, buy expensive cars, start acting like rich people?" Now we prove that good leadership creates lasting value for everyone, not just the people at the top. And we teach Emma that real power comes from lifting other people up, not from keeping them down. As we walked into our house, the same house we'd lived in throughout my undercover months, I realized that the most important transformation hadn't been in the company's leadership structure. It had been in my understanding of what leadership actually means. Richard had confused authority with leadership, control with effectiveness, and fear with respect. Real leadership, I'd learned, comes from understanding the people you serve, protecting their interests even when it's difficult, and using power to create opportunities rather than to protect privileges. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult decisions, and the complex work of rebuilding a company culture that had been damaged by months of toxic leadership. But tonight, for the first time in 15 months, I felt like I could finally rest easy, knowing that justice had been served and good people were finally going to get the leadership they deserved. The quiet man from cubicle 47B was gone forever. But Gary Thompson, CEO, leader, and protector of his father's legacy, was just getting started.